Welcome to the Timescales Interviews. I'm Grego, your host. Today we have a very special guest, television and audio adventure writer, author, creative consultant, artist, and more. The only person on Earth to have written for Mystery Science Theater 3000 and Doctor Who, the extraordinary Joshua Pruett. Hi, Joshua.
Hi, Greg. Hey, thanks for having me here.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Now, this interview is being conducted in California and California.
That's right.
Am I correct? You're right here in our beautiful Golden State?
Yeah. I am a West Coaster. Yeah, born and bred.
Okay. All righty.
Well,
I am really pleased to be able to catch up to you today, because you seem to have been extremely busy recently. Haven't you been at book signings 24 hours a day for the last couple of weeks or something?
It pretty much feels like it. Yeah.
Okay, so tell us about what you've been out signing, the last comics on Earth.
Great. Yeah, happy to. I had an opportunity some years back to join the animated adaptation of The Last Kids on Earth. New York Times best-selling book series written by Max Brallier and illustrated by Doug Holgate. We're up to, I think, book 8 at this point, but near about book 5, I got tapped to come and help out and help adapt it to animation with a buddy of mine, Scott Peterson, from my Phineas and Ferb days. And struck up, I should say, a friendship with Max Brallier. And so we've been kind of looking for things to work on together. I did some work on the video game series, and when there was kind of an opportunity to do a spin-off of that Last Kid series, Max tapped me for that. It was a great chance for us to work closely together and, make each other laugh. And it's a really fun and kooky and very comics-centered spin-off of that series proper, where our 4 heroes realize that there are no more comics being made because they live in the apocalypse. And so they decide to make their own. And they invent their own superhero personas. And so it was a really great opportunity to kind of play in a superhero space, but make it really funny, really abstract, and, something really cool that parents could also enjoy with their kids.
Okay, excellent. And it just came out.
It did. It's only been out like a little more than week and a half, maybe.
That must be exciting. Now, I know that you have a long string of successes, and I'm wondering, is there always that giddy feeling to see something new you worked on come out?
100%. I mean,
Okay.
there's very little like it. Is because, I think a lot of the times, you're working on something silently, nobody knows what you're doing. There's a lot of hours, there's a lot of late nights. And by the time you get to the place where it's actually physically real and you can hold it in your hands, like that's a really singular kind of joy for sure.
Okay, very good. Now, for those listening or watching, I would highly urge you to just Google Mr. Pruett and check out his IMDb. When I read his IMDb, I was very surprised because of the list of work that he has done, and I would highly suggest that you do check that out. And speaking of reading your IMDb, have you ever heard of something called an Emmy Award?
Yes, I've heard tell of these Emmy Awards. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's jump off into Doctor Who here for just a moment.
Oh, great.
Yep. When did you start watching Doctor Who, and who is your doctor?
So I the way I kind of look at it is that you have a first and a favorite, and sometimes those switch around. But my first was really Tom Baker. My first experience was watching Tom Baker in the 80s. I was visiting my dad in New York and literally had that hiding behind the couch experience. And it was on KPBS, which is how we got a vintage Doctor Who or classic Who back in the day. And I think I've figured out it's either Seeds of Doom or it was Ark in Space, and they kind of merged in my head. But there was certainly body horror and there was certainly bubble wrap involved. But I remember being terrified out of my mind and kind of fell in love. And then kind of picked it back up again in the modern era. And you know, the catching up with David Tennant and going back and watching Christopher Eccleston and you know, falling in love with the show kind of all over again a second time, which was a real joy.
Okay, so you mentioned catching up with David Tennant. Were you watching Rose live when it aired in 2005, or did you
No, and
re
it's a great question because I wish that I was. I had
Okay,
heard about it, and one of the things that I've noticed over the years is that that time between the UK broadcast and here in the States, thanks to BBC America, all that time's gotten shorter. But back in 2005, I remember we had to wait some time here in the States before we were able to catch up with everything. And so it was, I think by the time I was able to watch, I think Ninth Doctor was already gone.
okay,
So I was doing
um,
a little catch up at that point.
okay. So you did a rewind
I did,
a
I
bit.
did.
Now you mentioned first catching Tom Baker era
Yeah,
on PBS.
yeah.
That's how I discovered Doctor Who, and yeah, I believe it was a San Jose station. I don't
Oh,
remember the
fun.
call. Yeah, and they had something where they would do fundraisers, and they would have breaks in between the episodes where everyone was in cosplay, and they had a whole phone bank of people taking
Wow.
calls. Did you see any of those on your PBS?
You know, not that I recall. You know, I think I was just kind of mystified by the whole thing
Hmm.
because it had, you know, it had that kind of video broadcast quality. So even if you were switching between channels, it looked different. It looked different than anything else that I would have been watching, you know, certainly even between Sesame Street and what a Doctor Who broadcast would look like.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I don't remember that, but that, I mean, that would have been a trip.
Yeah.
What it makes me think of is like, you know, we didn't really get Blue Peter over here, but that
Right.
in my head, that's probably what that would have been like having an opportunity to see some of that, you know, because even having an awareness of people doing Doctor Who cosplay, I wouldn't have even known of such a
Right.
thing, you know.
Right. Yeah, and then this was in the 80s. I think it was only a couple of the PBS stations in America that did those
Oh, okay.
fundraisers. Yeah, it wasn't very widespread. So
Mm,
now you wrote an audio adventure for Big Finish, which is titled Tides of the Moon.
yeah,
And this was part of the Waterworlds box set performed by Colin Baker and Bonnie Langford and a talented team of actors. And you wrote these stories alongside of Jacqueline Rayner and Jonathan Morris as a part of this box set.
that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, how did the whole Big Finish thing go down? From what I understand, it's not something where you can submit a story and say, "Hey, I want to write for you." There has to be something else in the process. How did that go down?
Yeah, it was a heck of an adventure actually, and it was one of the biggest honors of my life, if I'm totally frank.
Mm.
Um, so two things. I had been following Big Finish for a number of years, and they had a certain number of open calls that they would throw out, both for Bernie stories, and I think they also had a couple of like competitions for submitting. And I had done that like 3 times. I think I had, and at one point I had gotten some positive feedback, I think from a producer, Ian Atkins, who just said that the story was halfway decent and that I should continue to submit, but you know, didn't place, you know, wasn't able to kind of make the cut. And also submitted a Bernie story. So like I had put together 3 or 4 pitches. But like you say, you know, there's really no other formalized process. Because I had some experience writing licensed material for things like How to Train Your Dragon and Jungle Book and Avatar, the animated TV series. You know, my hope was to kind of also maybe try to hit that way. You know, if I having some license experience working with large properties, that maybe I could convince someone that, you know, I was up to the task to write something for Doctor Who, because that was a dream of mine. So I started following a lot of those writers for Big Finish, writers for Penguin UK, who are all writing wonderful things in the worlds of Doctor Who. And one of the first writers I sought out was Jack Rayner, and I found her on Twitter, and she happened to have her profile icon was Vanessa from Phineas and Ferb. And so
Oh,
when
really?
she saw that I had worked on that series, we struck up a friendship, and the odds of that were pretty phenomenal. So always grateful for that experience. But
Wow.
we kind of started a mutual admiration society because her boys had watched some of my other animation work. And so we just kept in contact over a number of years. There was another open call that Penguin had put out at some point, and she was kind enough to put my name in the hat for that. Nothing came of it, but that was certainly kind and generous of her to do that. And it was actually during the pandemic when Jack got promoted to produce the Sixth Doctor line of stories for Big Finish. And at that point, Jack's been writing incredible stuff for Colin, for the 10th Doctor books. I mean, she's written just some extraordinary things. And they tapped her to produce for Colin, and she emailed me almost as soon as she got the okay. And I was out for a walk when I got the email because of the time difference, and I wept. Like, I was
Oh,
just so blown away. And she was like, "Hey," she was like, "There's no money and there's not that much time, and but would love for you to be a part of it." And I was, and then I proceeded and running around the house and screaming like a maniac. But yeah, I couldn't have said yes any faster than I
oh,
did.
wow. That
And then yeah, go ahead.
that's unbelievable. That's I've heard a couple of the stories of the feelings of joy like that. Here, let me throw something else out to you here.
Please.
Um, you said that it was a lifetime goal, and
Yeah.
and you reached it, and it occurred to me, someone told me this in a previous interview, that they weren't just writing for Doctor Who, that they got their name down as a part of British cultural history itself.
Mm.
That's a big deal. Um, do you feel as if you have contributed to British cultural history also through Doctor Who?
Oh, I think personally, I just feel honored to be a part of it at all. And
Hmm.
I certainly consider Doctor Who to be a pinnacle of British popular culture. I consider it to be an institution. And certainly when it's something like Big Finish, I feel like it really is connected, and to the history of that series. I mean, I think Big Finish is responsible for a lot of the lifeblood that carried us through those dark times, right?
Hmm.
And I think certainly showrunners like Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat have often you know gotten behind Big Finish, and even we've got a couple of references to Big Finish companions that have turned out in the modern series. So I certainly feel like it's legitimate, and so to be a part of that in any way, in any small way, is just utterly mind-blowing to me.
Wow.
And I didn't think I to be honest, I didn't think I ever had a shot. I just was, I wasn't gonna quit. I was gonna
Okay.
just keep trying by hook or by crook. And yeah, it was an unbelievable privilege.
Okay. Wow. That's a beautiful way to put it. The dark time when there was no Doctor Who, 1989 to, I believe, 1996 with the movie,
96. Yeah.
and then 2005 with the revival by Russell T Davies. Were you always still interested in Doctor Who during that time?
It was off and on. It was
Hmm.
it was me kind of getting a sense of, because again, for us to get the series here in the States, I felt like it was sporadic at best. Like,
Hmm.
even after I had watched the Tom Baker era, it was only pieces, right? And my
Hmm.
recollection is that, and I've since gone back and done a little bit of research, but we would get chunks of the next Doctors as they were coming, but there were still these giant spaces in between where we
Hmm.
would get almost nothing. And certainly John Nathan Turner was really focused on trying to bring Who more into the United States in some of that era. Um, but I do remember sitting down to watch the TV movie, to watch the Eighth Doctor when that premiered, because I was just so excited at that opportunity. Um, and have since gone back and tried to find all the Virgin books and kind of catch up. Because I think the other piece of it is like trying to get access to those licensed materials. That was really tough in the 90s too, especially here in the States.
Mhm.
Like I felt like we had a little bit, but it's like unless I was able to have someone drive me to a Doctor Who convention or a sci-fi convention, it was hard to get a hold of that stuff. I feel
Yeah.
like most of my adult life, I've been trying to fill in those blanks.
Okay. And I know that at least on our PBS channel, some of the episodes were not even broadcast in order.
That's right. Or
Right.
at all. Like
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I know that some of them we got like the compendium versions of like some of the John Pertwee stories and things. So it's like we
Mhm.
didn't even get the full stories. So
Right. Right. Okay. So I think I already know the answer to this next question. If Big Finish were to ask you to write another Doctor Who story, or for that matter, if BBC were to ask you to write a story for Doctor Who on TV, would you do it?
oh, and yeah, 100% in a
Okay.
heartbeat.
All right.
I had an amazing time working with Rob Valentine, our story editor, and just got some of the best notes of my career. So yeah, I wouldn't hesitate. My dream would be to do it kind of forever. That's really I Doctor Who obviously is a huge part of my life, and yeah, I don't want it to stop if I'm being perfectly honest.
Okay, beautiful. Um, so shifting gears to television,
Sure.
non-Doctor Who television, tell us a little bit about your work for Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Oh, another dream in its way. So, grew up with the original series. And one of those things where was up late at night at a sleepover with friends and saw that there were little silhouettes at the bottom of the screen and that they were making jokes and told them to, turn up the volume. What is that? And, proceeded to laugh my ass off for most of my life. And like I kind of credit Mystery Science with being that formative part of my sense of humor. Like is the thing that I have told others is you know uh Mystery Science Theater is my favorite show of all time, and Doctor Who is my favorite show of time and space, of all time
Okay.
and space. And so these are kind of my loves. And what ended up happening is befriended one of our editors on Phineas and Ferb named Lauren Christ, and she had like a giant Mystery Science Theater the movie poster on her office when I joined the series in 2011, and we hit it off immediately. And she is friends with Jonah Ray, and what happened was a year or more, maybe 2 years before the Kickstarter, they needed some help with some storyboards. So my background in animation, I started as a storyboard artist and kind of moved my way into being a writer as well, and then a full-time writer like I am today. And so I started as a storyboard artist, and that's what they needed. They needed some storyboards, but they needed, a fan because there wasn't a lot of money involved. So they needed somebody who kind of knew the world and the characters, who could do what they needed. And so I spent about a year working with Joel Hodgson, the creator, and I did like 6 or 7 different versions of Joel's origin story. And it was the kind of thing where they had a script, they had ideas, they had props that they were designing, they had elements that they were designing. And so it was a way for Joel to kind of ideate early on in that process and get a sense of what the new look of the show might be. And yeah, it was a total blast. And I would try to put in ridiculous references, and Joel was real tolerant. He would say, you'd be like, well, I don't know that we need that Dinger's reference in there, but that's really fun. And it was a very collaborative process. And kind of in the midst of that, I asked if he was comfortable with me doing a little bit of writing for the show. And he said yes. And so I got to actually
Mhm.
write riffs for Beast of Hollow Mountain, which is in the first Netflix season, Mystery Science Theater: The Return. But they use 35 or more of my jokes that I pitched, and at that point I'd been writing in animation for 4 or 5 years. So I was used to what we call writing alts or alternates. So you might pitch a joke in a script or for a storyboard, and then you pitch lots of other ideas because maybe that joke doesn't hit, or maybe that joke isn't in the right joke area that someone might want. And so the idea of pitching a lot of material, a lot of jokes for one window or opening for a joke, I was really used to that at that point. So like I had kind of exercised those muscles. Yeah, it was incredible experience.
Okay, I had never heard of a writing technique like that using
Yeah.
alts. Is that
Yeah.
common?
Yeah, and that I think that's just the term that they use so that they have options is what it comes down to. And the software that they had provided us with, I think it was proprietary, it's something they put together. But the idea was, you would be watching the film, the raw film, and I watched it a couple times, and it was brutal.
Mhm.
And comes with the gig. And like when you paused it, the time code showed up on a small pop-up window, and so then you kind of write your jokes in there. So it was
Okay,
just it was like a little dashboard that came up.
okay.
Um,
Inside the software. So when you said that a time code came up, I thought back to magnetic media and then realized no, you're talking about software. Okay, which I
yeah,
guess could
software.
still be considered magnetic media if it's played from a hard drive, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so when looking over your mini bio on IMDb and seeing, I mean, huge names, Titan Books, Lego, Warner Animation Group, DreamWorks, Netflix, Paramount, NBC Universal, the list just goes on. And the first thing I thought of when seeing something like that is that this person here is just a natural born talent. And it makes me wonder about your earlier years and the origins of your creative arts. Did you always know that you wanted to be a writer?
No, I didn't. And I think in my experience, I think talent is probably part of it, but in my experience, it's down to a lot of hard work.
Okay.
It's working when other people are relaxing or when other people are sleeping. I don't know that I've wanted anything more than this, outside of being blessed to have a wife and children and to be happily married to my best friend. But I think outside of that, it's really like I want to tell stories and I want to do it for, all of my days. And so for me, it's like, great, here's all the different ways I can do that. I can do it in comics and books and animation and live action and audio. And so for me, it's about that, real diversification. But it did
Mhm.
start when I was young. I wrote and drew. And it wasn't when I was trying to figure out what to do with my schooling, it was a matter of going, okay, well, everything I've ever read about being a writer was, butt in the chair, right? And my thought was if I went to school for art, then I could learn a trade. I could learn a craft that, I could find gainful employment in. As ridiculous as it is for, that idea of choosing between being a writer and an artist and, being a starving artist, as necessary. But at the time, that was my rationale. Was I thought, well, I'm just going to keep writing in my spare time. So that's what I did. So I was always writing short stories. I was doing mini comics and sketchbooks and ash cans and going to Comic Con and selling them with my friends. And I have my first short story was published in Horror Hound magazine, issue number 4. It was about a guy who unties his own belly button. So I've kind of always been doing both. And it's what I live for. It's what I'm really the most passionate about. And one of my favorite movies is Buckaroo Banzai, and there's this great opening scroll where they talk about how Buckaroo is always moving in more than one direction at once, and like I've kind of taken that to heart over the years. That to me that seems to be how to stay afloat, how to be successful in this very challenging industry or industries, is to kind of move in more than one direction at the same time.
Okay, very good. Diversification.
Yeah,
That's okay. Now, when back to your very first works,
yeah.
do you recall having mentors around you that supported you? And by any chance, did anybody ever refer to you as having genius?
No, no.
No?
That's no, not at all. A flattering notion, but it's not even anything that I ascribe to be honest. It's like for me, I think I was very lucky. I had parents who were creative. My both of my parents sang. My dad was super into movies and showed us lots of Ray Harryhausen movies when we were growing up, and so creativity was certainly in our household. But I think I was blessed by having, teachers who were encouraging, who like would read a scary short story and instead of kind of shaming me or making me feel embarrassed, like encourage that sort of behavior. So, it felt good to do that. Um, but yeah, for me, like I said, it's really always been about the work. And, I think I've been around people that I might point to and say, that they are geniuses, that they have this other kind of unknowable component to their talent and the application of it. But I yeah, for me, it's like, yeah, I'm a hard worker, man.
Okay. Okay, very good. Now, speaking of the work, how do you go about writing a story? Do you sit down at a typewriter, put in a blank piece of paper, and type the title by Joshua Pruitt and just start there, or is it more complicated than that?
It depends on the story, really. I think I live a lot in my phone app, so that I have a notes app that I use, just your normal iPhone notes app. And what I found is that, you can get ideas from anywhere at any time. And I
Mhm.
think part of the discipline of being a creative person, being a writer, is kind of capturing those ideas when you have them. And for some folks, it's a sketchbook. That was the way it was when I was drawing more often in my full-time career. I still have a sketchbook. I still, I'll still like make notes
Mhm.
um, to myself for story, for work stuff, for my own books and comics. Um, but all of them kind of start in a very mushy process. One of my favorite books about writing is On Writing by Stephen King, which I would recommend to anybody who has a desire to pursue a creative career. But in it, he talks about writing being kind of an excavation of sorts, where sometimes you might find this part of a bone, or you're cleaning up, you find another part of a bone, but it's rare that you're going to discover a whole skeleton all at once. And I've always thought that was a lovely metaphor. And for me, it's a lot like that. I've had
Okay.
plenty of things that I've done my own stories, and then even stories for for the companies, for TV and film, where it's like, oh, I had a notion, and then we kind of cultivate that notion or work on it. Um, like I said, it starts kind of mushy, and then what you do is like you're building a structure. I'm kind of a structure guy, so I really think about the shape of a story. What are all those kind of larger rhythms? So it's like even when I was writing Tides of the Moon, I went and watched a lot of classic Who, and kind of felt like, well, and not to like, it's not about my ego and I'm not comparing myself, but I was looking at some Robert Holmes stories, I was looking at some Stephen Moffat stories, I was um looking at the modern and classic and kind of figuring out how could I kind of put it together.
Mhm.
There's things about the pacing of the modern era that I think are dead on, and then there's things about like a Robert Holmes script that there's a brightness to the characters, there's a smartness to their lived in qualities, where you're being dropped in, and it is so clear in a Robert Holmes script that all of those characters have a life before the camera's kind of turned on. And
Okay.
so, and he's also really great at structure, so there are these rhythms. So for me, I think that's one of the things I love thinking about as a storyteller, are those structural elements, like, how to build a story so that you're pulled into it and then it ramps up. And so for me, that's really where I start. That's where I kind of start building those bones. And you'll get dialogue in the midst of that process. There'll be moments, and then you're kind of like putting them together until you have something that looks like it can get out there and run on its own.
Okay. Now, I've heard writers talk about having writer's block, maybe going
Mm,
for a couple of weeks without being able to come up with anything.
yeah.
And I don't know if you've experienced that, but do you have what I call a giant toggle switch where the creativity isn't there, but if you can pull this toggle switch down hard enough and boom, get it to turn on, then all of a sudden the creativity is flowing. Do you have some magical toggle switch where you can just turn on creativity?
I wish I did, and there's times where I wish I could turn it off because
Okay.
because I want to break or I want to rest. Like I'm not particularly good at that. Like I feel like there's times, very recently my wife Amanda, who's, as I've said, is amazing. She was like, "Honey, why don't you just go watch a movie?" Like why don't you just go relax a little bit? And man, I am not good at that. So that is something I'm working on. I think I haven't really experienced writer's block very often. I think usually it's, if I've run into it, it's that story's not ready.
Mhm.
So, I prefer to look at it like a little, like a stove. Like you've got stuff on the back burner and you've got stuff on the front burner. And so if you're working on something, it might just not be ready. It's not baked,
Okay.
it's not maybe edible yet. And as far as getting that inspiration, um, I think sometimes I need quiet. I think so, like I used to write to music more often than early in my career, or draw to music, or even listening to like audio commentaries. And these days I need an hour, I need to sit quietly, and kind of just get started and get going. And or take a walk.
Okay.
I've actually gotten some of my best ideas. This is insane. I've gotten some of my best ideas literally washing my hands. I
The
got
simple
up.
things.
Yeah, I got up and went and I moved something in the house, or I was at the office and I went to use the restroom, washed my hands, walked back and went, "Oh, that's how I solved that story problem." It's one of those things where it's like, if you're, or driving. It's one of those things where I think off, there is a the background noise of the world. It's like when you're able to turn that off, like your brain will start to knit these things together. That's certainly what I found. So it's kind of like a subroutine that you're always working on. There, Lawrence Kasdan, who wrote Raiders and Empire Strikes Back, he said this thing once that being a writer is like having homework every day for the rest of your life, and it's a lot like that. Because because if you're not working on something for someone else, you want to be working on something for yourself. So you don't really ever stop. Certainly there's things that, like, there's lulls, right? There's hills and valleys. But I've certainly found that if I'm stuck, yeah, I need to take a walk. I need to get out, go do something else. There's that joke of, like, being a writer, a creative person, you're going to start cleaning your fridge at some point. And what I've discovered is that, maybe that's good, right? Because that
Mhm.
gets those subroutines kind of problem solving when you're not paying attention.
Okay, and I find it interesting that you mentioned that you have written while listening to music at the same time, because it seems as if a lot of creative minds are not only interested in certain types of arts, but they have an appreciation for a broad range, if not all arts. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, um, all right, now this goes along with what you were just saying here. I have just a couple more questions here. I had asked
Great.
you for an hour, and it looks like we're on target.
Wonderful.
And I'm going to put these out of order of what I had planned, because uh, you touched on something where it goes along with what I've learned from every single person I've interviewed in
Hmm.
arts and performing arts.
Hmm.
There is something in common which is called rejection, and
Oh, yes.
this is where I think you already know, it's where something you're working on is either turned down or ignored, the whole negative side.
Yeah.
If you have dealt with rejection of your works in the past, how did you deal with that?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, it's really nonstop.
Mm.
I have a friend named Nico Bannister, who's a concept designer, biz dev artist, and one of the things that he threw out to me once was this idea that collecting no's is actually the job.
Oh,
So it's just a different way of reframing, right? Because what it means, what I really appreciated about that insight was that it's a reminder that you're just supposed to get out there and stick your neck out. You're supposed to take risks. You're supposed to try. You're supposed to submit. I'm thrilled. I sold a book series here at the end of the year, um, but collected, I don't know, 25 rejections on that one, maybe minimum,
what?
over the course of a few years. And it's a pretty normal part of this process. And I think certainly you get better at it. And I have found ways to work around it, ways so that I, don't have to take it too personally, even though it's completely personal. But one of the first big times I encountered rejection was when I was at DreamWorks. I was an intern there first, and then that turned into a production position working on Shrek the Third and Over the Hedge. That's where I started my career, and I had wanted to get into their story trainee program, storyboarding program. And I had some formal art training from Cal State University Fullerton, and I was making those independent comics and short stories. And so I said, hey, can I apply to this trainee program? They had 4 slots. They would do it every year. They would bring in, young folks, and they would train them to become story artists, feature animation story artists. And they told me no. They said because I was working in production, that they actively discourage production personnel from transitioning to the art side. And I just didn't understand it, because I thought, and certainly reading entertainment biographies and folks that I had admired who had artistic background, you get in any way you can, and you ingratiate yourself, you work hard, right? You prove yourself, and you work your way up the ladder. I thought that's how that worked, right?
Mhm.
And I just waited for them to get fired. And a year later they did, and I asked the new regime if I could take the storyboard test, and they were like, of course you could take the test. They responded in the way that anyone would have dreamed, which is, hey, if you're halfway decent at this, Josh, you know how the sausage is made. You've been here for years, so you would be an asset in more than one way. And in 2006, my life changed, and I became a story trainee at DreamWorks. And I was the first internal production candidate to ever make that leap in the history of the studio. And it was because I just didn't let that rejection stop me. The other story I love to share, I'll make it quick,
But
is
take your time.
after DreamWorks kind of let me go. This was 5 years later. I was out trying to find work, and I had done another test for another company.
Mhm.
And when I handed in that test, the person doing the evaluation, the supervising director, took it personally for some reason, and felt like I had intentionally spiked the ball somehow, like I hadn't taken the test seriously or what have you. And of course that wasn't the case, so I was very puzzled by their response. But I ended up taking that same storyboard test and used it as a part of my application for Phineas and Ferb and the original Lego movie. And for the first and only time in my life, I got 2 job offers in the same week. And off of that failed story test. And so, it taught me a valuable lesson that, really it depends on who's looking. And that I think a part of your journey as a creative person, and even for the folks who aren't in a creative industry, I think part of our journey as humans is to find your people, to find where you are supposed to be. And sometimes we find it the first time out, and sometimes it takes these rejections to kind of steer us to where we're supposed to be. And I ended up taking the position on Phineas and Ferb because for the first time in my career, I'd get credit as a writer, and it 100% changed the course of my career, utterly and completely. But again, based on that rejection, not allowing those rejections to stop me. And, in point of fact, kind of using them to fuel whatever that next step was going to be.
That's one of the most beautiful and educational stories I've heard. Yeah, that is absolutely unbelievable.
Thanks,
Collecting
man.
no's. It sounds like you played the long game. You know,
Yeah. Long
that's the
game is
whole.
actually, that's a great observation. Long game is something I think about a lot. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. People are
Yeah.
going to be able to learn from you. There will be people that look at this interview in the future. They're gonna go, okay, well, maybe I can learn from this guy. Let's see what he said about what I'm interested in.
Oh,
People are going to be able to
thanks.
learn from you. And I
Thank you.
really thank you for that, because that is exactly what this interview series is about. So
Great.
okay, so
Perfect.
let's go ahead and wrap it up here, because I don't like to run over what I've
Sure.
told people that I expect it to take, and we've got about maybe 10 minutes left here. So
Perfect.
the uh next question is really simple. What is your educational background?
So initially I had gone to UC Santa Cruz and ran out of dough. So I had tried the
Okay.
UC system here in California,
Hmm.
and wanted to be a film major and ran out of money and had to come home and kind of reset. But I ended up doing community college for a couple years, which was fantastic. That worked out so well for me, and ended up transferring to Cal State Fullerton. So, I wasn't the kind of person who had really, really amazing artwork as a younger person. I was really still learning and growing. And so, I didn't get into Cal Arts, I didn't get into Art Center or any private university, and couldn't afford them to begin with. And so Cal State ended up being a real lifesaver, because at Fullerton, they had built an entertainment art animation program. And it was
Really?
relatively new at the time. This was 1999 or so. And yeah, I mean, that changed my whole life. Met my best friends at Cal State Fullerton. A lot of students who were similarly ambitious, but had to put the work in.
Hmm.
And none of us were the kind of folks who had a lot handed to us. And so I think that bonded a lot of students there at the time. And our success rate is kind of unprecedented. Like I want to brag on my friends a little bit, but one of my roommates ran Star Wars Resistance for Disney Plus, as a executive producer and supervising director. And my other best friend, he's been a partner and lead animator at Titmouse Studios for, I don't know, 20 years at this
Hmm.
point. So there's some extraordinary talent coming from a place where, we it was a community that we built. And keeping each other inspired, talking about movies and animation and comics and books nonstop. Me making them watch, John Carpenter movies
Hmm.
and Doctor Who and Mystery Science Theater. And you can learn a lot from a bad movie. And one of the things I kind of take with me when I'm sharing, or when I'm teaching myself, is sometimes you can learn more from a bad movie than a good one. Sometimes a really good movie, all the pieces, there's an alchemy that can be difficult to kind of pick apart. But there's a line in a Mike Nelson episode of Mystery Science where one of the riffs is, "Oh, someone forgot to have something happen in this scene." And at the time, I just laughed, but I realized after the fact, and in my college years, that like that's a great reminder. If you've got a scene in your story and nothing really happens, it doesn't really move forward, either your characters or the story or the plot. Like that, yeah, that might be a problem. And so kind of in that space, really built a lot of the habits and the creative habits that actually still serve me today. A lot of those were built at Fullerton. And I ended up with a Bachelor of Fine Arts, a BFA, and decided I just decided my work wasn't quite strong enough And so I stayed on to get a master's in illustration to kind of bulk up my portfolio, but also realize that it gave me a chance to do more internships. And that's where I ended up. I finally got into internship at DreamWorks. I tried 3 years in a row and got rejected. And the last time I had gotten a job offer to work with the Donner Company. So that's Lauren Schuler Donner, who was producing the X-Men films at the time. And of course, Richard Donner, Dick Donner, who did Lethal Weapon and Goonies and Omen, among other things. And it was an internship in Hollywood. It was unpaid, but I would have access to these amazing creative people, and great place to start. But I really wanted to be at DreamWorks because at the Donner Company, I would be going out and picking up lunch for people. If I got the DreamWorks internship, they fed you. And as a young unpaid intern with, a part-time job and a commute, going to DreamWorks meant I could take food home with me. So I wasn't going to starve. And so I ended up using the Donner Company offer to get the DreamWorks internship. I called and said, hey, I've got this offer, but I would much rather be seeing you guys a couple times a week. And that's where everything kind of kicked off. But yeah, Fullerton was an amazing time, a very formative time. And I look back fondly on those days. And yeah, that's where I got all my best friends.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
You have any crazy secret hobbies like skydiving or surfing, maybe?
I probably need some. I think of what I've learned about myself today is like I need a hobby. I love working with wood. I can like this shiplap wall behind us. Like I actually put it together myself over the course of a couple days. And the wall I actually built, my dad helped me out, but I built this wall in our house. And so I could create office space in a very large open dining area. But yeah, I love working with my hands, but yeah, not too crazy, nothing too crazy.
Okay, so you made this TARDIS. I had to ask about this
did,
TARDIS.
yeah. So I actually did, and it used when I was on Milo Murphy's Law at Disney, we had a cubicle, traditional cubicles for folks, and I wanted to do something different, and so I built this TARDIS facade, and these doors used to open. So this is how I used to get in and out of my cubicle.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. And it was rigged on like just 2x4s, like a square of 2x4s, and it would just sit on the ground to support the weight of this thing. And it's really heavy. But once I installed this wall, I like rigged it to the wall so it's not going to fall on me. It was a little bit dangerous for a while.
How
But
much is
the
it?
TARDIS is a little bit dangerous, so
There you go. How much does that thing weigh?
this is probably about 15 or 20 pounds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So, do you have any favorite charities by any chance?
I do actually. Heroes Initiative, which is a comic book charity for comic book creators, where it's essentially for helping folks who've been in comics for a number of years. There's really no parachute for the comics industry. There's no union, there's no guild. I'm real privileged that I get to be in the animation guild, and I've been in for quite a few years at this point in my career. But comic books don't have anything like that. So the Heroes Initiative is a great way to kind of help support comic book creators, writers, artists, inkers, colorists, letterers, who've written and contributed to the stories that we've loved our whole lives, who don't have anything to fall back on. So it's a really, really special charity.
Okay, and you say it's Heroes Initiative.
Heroes Initiative, and I believe it's heroesinitiative.com.
Okay, for people watching this on YouTube, we're going to put a link right down here. So you can click on that, and please do check out Heroes Initiative. Thank you, Mr. Pruett, for his thank Mr. Pruett for his time today. Um, and we can all learn something from him. This is a very interesting story,
Thank
and
you, sir.
time is valuable, and it is very much appreciated. So, what are you working on now that you're excited about, or is it something that maybe you can't talk about? No,
There's
no
plenty of things,
spoilers here.
plenty of things I can't talk about, but
Good.
yeah,
Okay.
so excited about uh Last Comics on Earth finally hitting bookstores. Full-size graphic novel written by myself and Max Brollier, illustrated by the force of nature that is Jay Cooper, and Doug Holgate. And it's just a big romp. It's a total blast. It's a hardcover graphic novel. It's over 200 pages, so
Mhm.
you're really getting something for your money. We Max and I are in the midst of writing book 2 literally right now. And there are supposed to be 4 of them, which is going to
Oh,
be a
nice.
really wonderful adventure. Yeah, it's great. These characters are just I could write I could write them forever. I love them, and working with Max and Jay and Doug has been absolute joy. And yeah, and hopefully in a couple years I could circle back, and that book series I just sold, we can talk about
Okay.
that.
Okay. Awesome.
But
And
my hope is before then maybe there'll be a Doctor Who in there somewhere.
okay, beautiful. I don't see why there wouldn't.
Thank you.
So and I think before we started recording, I think I probably told you as soon as we're finished, I'm going to Target and
Yes.
our big chain box store here, and I am picking up the last comics on Earth because
Yay!
how often can you read stories by an author that you just talked to on Zoom? So
Very, very
that
rarely in my
very
experience as
rarely,
well.
yeah, I
Yes.
don't think I ever have. So
No.
so aside from our American big box store chain Target, where else can people find the last comics on Earth?
Well, the great news is, if you've got a local independent bookstore, certainly hit them up. I've also been trying to reach out to local comic book shops, because the beautiful thing about Last Comics and Last Kids is that, it's built for that younger audience.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we are also available at Walmart locations, and Amazon and Barnes and Noble as well.
Okay, very good. And where do you like to be found online?
Folks can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Zombie TARDIS, which is
Okay.
spelled like it sounds. So ZOMBIE TARDIS. That's on Instagram and Twitter.
Okay, very good. Now, was there anything that I did not ask today that you wish that I had?
No, no,
No,
but
covered it
hey,
all.
next time we'll come
Okay.
on, we'll talk more Doctor Who too.
Okay, that sounds good. Now, you have pretty much told an awesome story, but to summarize with this interview series, if anyone young or old
Mm.
looks at this video in the future to learn from your success and your talent, do you have a single best piece of advice that you could give them?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think the thing that I think about often, and I can tell you that in those moments, like in that when I was applying to that trainee position, you know, having some of those mini comics and short stories, I think made a difference. And so I think the thing I would share is, make things and show it to people. Finish things. So a lot of us out there have got wonderful napkin ideas, note card, post-it ideas, and very few of us take the time to finish them. I've talked to a lot of young people, and we're all ambitious. We all have really great ambition to tell our big stories, do our Star Wars, do our Doctor Who. But I think what it comes down to is finishing things, because when you finish something, you then have an opportunity to move on to the next and the next and the next, and you're going to get better every time. And so, the books I'm writing now are so much better than the ones that I wrote when I first started. So, we have access to all kinds of technology and the internet. We have access to anything. You can make your own mini comics. You can put them online. You can make your own short films, and you can put those online. So there's really nothing stopping you except for you. And you're the only person who cares how long this takes. So your journey is your journey. So make stuff, make stuff and show it to people, and prove to them that you've got what it takes, and then do it again and again and again.
Okay, awesome. All right, folks, thank Mr. Pruett for his time that he's spent educating us today. Go out and pick up The Last Comics on Earth, and you might just love it. I bet you will. I'm headed to Target to go pick it up right now.
Oh, I can't wait to hear what you think, Greg.
Okay, I'll let you know. Thank you kindly, Mr. Pruett. This has been so fun, and I consider it to be an honor. I appreciate it.
Happy to be here, and can't wait to come back.
You are absolutely welcome back, and I believe that's going to happen.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yep. Have a nice afternoon.
All righty. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Take care.